Hey everybody, John Brown here, Stormageddon42 on YouTube, GoogleAd9 on Board Game Geek, and I'm here to do a quick pros and cons video for Hyperborea. I'm doing this now because it's a game that had a pretty hefty initial base price, but has come down in price, probably due to not selling that well. As a bit of a spoiler, the game has really fantastic components in a lot of it. Very thick cardboard, all the different player factions have unique sculpts of miniatures, and there's a lot of stuff in here, and everything is pretty high quality, which is why the game probably cost a lot initially. But it's, like I said, it's come down in price. I've recently been able to pick it up and want to talk to you about it a little bit. I'm not going to do a full how to play breakdown like I usually do. This game's been out for a while. If you want to see kind of a breakdown of most of the rules, you can check out Joel Eddy at Drive Thru Review. Does a great job of that sort of stuff. And Grey Elephant Gaming actually does a full 2-player run-through, so you can see an entire game if you want to check all that out. So here I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the pros and cons. To start with, one initial con why I think potentially the game didn't sell as well as it could have, is a lot of people maybe feel like this wasn't what it was looking for. You might look at the box art and think that this is a heavily thematic Ameritrash war game, and it's not. Now, there are definitely attempts at theme. There's a lot of different factions in the game. They each have their different backstories and everything. But at the end of the day, this is a really crunchy Euro game. It's a bag builder like Orleans, where you're getting these cubes that you're putting in your bag and drawing them out, and then using them to activate things. You have your own player board that everyone starts with, and then you accumulate technologies, kind of like in a civilization game, and you have access to those. And so there is combat in the game, but it's very deterministic. You get an attack and you do it, and you beat an enemy. It's a little bit more complicated than that. There are ways to defend yourself, and kind of non-player characters on ruins on the board, but it's a really pretty heavy game. It has a pretty steep learning curve initially. But so now I'm going to go ahead and jump right into some potential cons. And like I said, one is that maybe it isn't what some people expected. But again, that's a potential con, not necessarily an actual con, because it may be exactly what you're looking for if you know what it is. And like I said, you can go see a full run-through of it or a breakdown of how it works and kind of see for yourself. There is a lot of setup time. This is one of the only kind of just pure cons I'm going to give, as opposed to potential ones. There's a bit of fiddliness, a lot of components, a lot of great components, but both the setup time and the initial rules explanation. This is a game that, depending on player count, depending on if you play the short, medium, or long game, say take a little over 2 hours to play, but there's going to be a lot of initial explanation. The game's going to be a little bit crunchy to start with. Also, learning the rules is going to be a little bit difficult. They weren't written in English initially. I think it was French initially, although I'm not sure. And there were some things that seemed pretty unclear to me. However, the designer of the game is on Board Game Geek answering questions. There's a great FAQ that you can look at that answers a lot of the major questions. So while there may be some things that are difficult to learn initially or not explained that well initially, definitely check out that FAQ, definitely get some answers, and while it may be a little bit of work, it's worth it, and I appreciate when a designer is willing to do that. But once you get over that initial learning curve of learning the game and the players getting used to it, the game actually runs pretty smoothly once you do that. But we'll get into that into the pros. So a bit of setup time, a high learning curve, and you might need some rules clarification. So those are all some cons, potentially in some cases and definitely in others. Another potential con is potentially game balance. So you can start with, and actually each player has, you can start without player abilities or with player abilities, and each faction in the game has 2 different abilities they can choose from. And also, each player can start with a home tile that's either the same for everybody or one that's unique to your faction that's also meant to balance the game if you're using those player abilities. I really like games that have variable player abilities. It's one of my favorite things in games. But anytime you have that, there are questions about balance. There are some powers that some people have argued are overpowered. I see a lot of discussion in particular about one of the blue player's powers. And I haven't played it enough to weigh in on that. All I'm going to say is there's a lot of discussion, a lot of people feel that way, but then there's people arguing against it, there's fixes for it. So, that is another potential con. Do you have to worry about that? Do you have to not allow certain powers, or you have to vary it? that might depend on your play group and what you think about it. So you notice I said the word potential there a lot. So a lot of potential cons. So if you're not interested in something with a steep learning curve, you're not interested in looking up the FAQs, if this isn't the style of game for you, obviously it's not going to work. But for any game this complex, you are going to have, a decent amount of setup time and initial learning curve teaching yourself and new players. But for the most part, a lot of that is potential cons, stuff that, if you're okay with all of that, then there aren't a lot of things I can point to and really say that this is absolutely bad. It may be bad if it isn't your style of thing, if it isn't what you're looking for, but not objectively bad. And I'm going to go jump into some of the things I think are really positive about it now. For one thing, I've already mentioned the components. They're fantastic across the board, no complaints. Super thick cardboard, the cards are nice, the miniatures are nice, every faction has their own miniatures. The rule book, while, like I said, not perfect, definitely has some good examples, and overall is pretty good. There's a lot of variability. There's a huge stack of these tiles that go around the center board and make up a lot of the board that isn't the home board. There's also a variety of game center tiles. There's a bit of area control and endgame scoring that you want to get to the center. So, and there's a stack of center tiles too. So a ton of variability as to initial setup, as to, different factions with 2-player powers. They can choose from one of each. So each game can be very different depending on the factions you play with. The map layout isn't going to make as much of a difference, but definitely some. So, each game is going to have a decent amount of variability. There is that variability in game length, too. That's another positive. I feel like the medium-length game, basically there's 3 endgame conditions, and you can play till somebody meets one of them, until a total of 2 have met, or all 3 of them met by the same player, or all the players, however it works. And while I feel like 3 might run a little bit long, and I feel like 1, you don't really get your engine going necessarily, depending on how quickly players rush towards one of those objectives. But I like that ability to vary the game length, and it's just one more aspect of variability. Now, and again, after you've played the game some, people get used to it. While there's a really steep learning curve initially, it runs pretty smoothly after that. And while you're going to have some turns where you just don't get to do much, especially, if you didn't plan well, there are, turns where you're only going to draw 1 or 2 cubes and there just isn't much you can do. You are going to have really amazing turns where, you're able to draw stuff, move players on the board and all this. And that's one of the kind of high learning curve initial things too, is on your turn you might be activating 2 different abilities, moving guys on the board, giving you multiple abilities, stacking movements and attacks and all this, and you don't have to necessarily do everything in, okay, now activate this, then do all of this. You can accumulate resources basically on your turn for moving troops, attacks, different abilities, and use them at any point on your turn. So you have a lot of chain effects, a lot of things where you kind of have to keep track in your head, okay, so I did, I gained a total of 3 movement, I moved here, but then got another 2 for this, and you can have really complex, kind of lengthy turns too. And, when you pull that off, it's kind of neat. And there are some games that can be annoying when other players are taking really lengthy turns, but in general, I feel like it's kind of interesting to watch that. And it's not going to happen necessarily all the time, but to kind of see what they're doing, and when you pull that off and have a really great turn, it's a really good feeling that goes with that. So, it's one of those things that you just kind of have to plan for. And like I said, it's definitely a heavy game. And if that's what you're looking for, a game where there's also a decent amount of variability in how you play in the strategy. In general, if you're playing with player powers, certain factions are going to lead towards certain playstyles. The red player has militaristic things, and he's probably going to want to, kill enemies. And even that is interesting, because if you kill one of your opponent's characters, you're going to get a point for it. But you can't get another point for killing one of those characters until you kill at least one of all the other players. So while you can do that, in general, you're not going to want to spend attacks on that, and you're not going to just go beat up on one player. So, but you can play militaristic, or you can play other styles, and just, one more kind of cool aspect. So definitely with Hyperborea, it's one of those games that I would say if it's not what you're looking for, it's not what you're looking for. Check out, how you play. Check out a gameplay run through of it, and that may turn you off. And some of the cons I mentioned, if that's something you're like, oh, that doesn't sound good to me, then yeah, it may not be for you. However, if you are looking for, something that has a little meat to it, has a good amount of variability, and really high quality components and a nice game to look at, then this is a game that I can recommend. Like I said, it's come down in price, and overall, if after seeing that sort of stuff, this is the game you're looking for, it's one that I can definitely recommend. So that's it for Hyperborea. I should be back to talk to you guys again soon. Let me know in the comments what you want to hear about. Several games I'm thinking about doing: Blood Rage, Steamworks. Even if you want to take a look at Star Wars Armada, something that I've been getting into recently, let me know, and I should be back to talk to you guys again soon. Hope you have a great New Year's coming up, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Alright, bye.